Hello, friends. Good evening. Tonight, we're stepping into the sun-scorched, olive oil-slicked world of ancient Greece, a civilization famous for mind-bending philosophy, the first sparks of democracy, and statues that, well, didn't bother with pants. But here's the hidden truth behind the legends of Plato, Sparta, and gleaming golden temples lies a harsh reality. Ancient Greece gave us the roots of Western civilization, yes, but for the average citizen, every single day was a struggle so brutal you wouldn't survive a single one. So before we walk into this world of sweat, dust, and survival, if my work sparks even the tiniest flicker of curiosity or awe in you, do me a favor. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and comment below to tell me where in the world you're watching from. It genuinely thrills me to see how far this journey reaches. Now, dim the lights a little, turn on a fan, let that soft, whispering breeze brush against your skin, and slowly, let's step into tonight's adventure. Trust me, what comes next is nothing like the boring history you dozed through in school.
Waking in the sun-baked world of ancient Greece. The first light of dawn in ancient Greece didn't arrive gently. There were no curtains to soften it, no alarm clocks to mark the start of the day. Instead, the sun rose relentlessly over mud brick and stone houses, turning walls into radiators and floors into slow cooking surfaces. If you were lucky enough to live in a modest town, your home was likely one room, low-ceilinged and hot in the summer, freezing in the winter. The windows had no glass, only wooden shutters that rattled against the wind and offered the slightest glimpse of the morning light. Privacy was a luxury the average Greek citizen could never afford, not even for a moment. Your family, your belongings, and perhaps a stubborn goat all shared the same space, and personal comfort was something you learned to survive without. You woke because the heat pressed against you, not because you wanted to greet the day. Summer mornings were merciless. The sun had already baked the stone walls overnight, and now every inch radiated warmth back into your skin, making lying down unbearable. In winter, the same walls became icy prisons, and you huddled beneath a thin cloak or straw-filled mat, hoping frostbite wouldn't claim your toes before you could reach the fire. Beds were simple, straw or reeds stuffed into a rudimentary frame, sometimes covered with a thin cloth. Pillows were uncommon, replaced by rolled cloaks or the nearest armrest. Hygiene was a practical challenge rather than a luxury. There was no running water in your home. Your morning ritual, if it could be called that, involved walking to the public fountain, or, for rural families, hauling water from the nearest well. The clay jars used to carry water were heavy, precariously balanced on the shoulders, and a single misstep could spill a week's worth of back-breaking labor across the dusty road. Bathing was rare in the morning. Most people saved it for the end of the day, if they bathed at all. A splash of water, a scrape of olive oil with a strigil, and you were considered ready. Privacy, naturally, was non-existent. Every member of the household observed, participated, or complained about every movement. The streets outside your home were no refuge. Narrow paths of dirt and stone doubled as marketplaces, hallways, and garbage dumps. Your feet, usually bare, collected dust, mud, and animal droppings in equal measure. Sweat collected under your tunic, skin itched from insects, and every simple movement was a small challenge. The average Greek citizen didn't have the conveniences we take for granted. No chairs to rest, no tables to dine upon, no soft beds to lie on, and no refrigeration to protect food from spoilage. Survival was a constant negotiation between comfort and necessity. Breakfast was minimal, often barely a meal. The staple was maza, a dense flatbread made from barley mixed with water, baked on hot stones or in the ashes of the previous night's fire. It was dry, sometimes hard, and occasionally infested with small insects or grit. If you were fortunate, a few olives or a smear of goat cheese might accompany it. Wine diluted with water, oxos, was a common drink, not for intoxication, but to kill harmful bacteria in the water supply. Wealthier households might add figs or honey, but for the majority, breakfast was functional, a survival tool rather than a pleasure. Eating was quick, almost perfunctory. Women and children often waited for the men to finish before they could eat, underscoring the rigid social structures of the day. Once fueled, the day demanded labor. Men might head to the fields to tend crops or herd animals, while women managed domestic tasks, grinding grain, fetching water, tending the hearth, and preparing meals. Children, even as young as 6 or 7, were expected to assist with chores. There was little room for idleness, and every moment was filled with activity or vigilance. Streets teemed with the sounds of commerce, animals, and occasional disputes. Villages were compact, neighbors knew each other intimately, and news traveled as quickly as someone could shout it across a courtyard. Work in ancient Greece was physical and relentless. Farmers labored under the unrelenting sun, tilling soil that was rocky and unforgiving, planting seeds in carefully measured rows, and harvesting crops with simple tools. Herders guided goats and sheep across rugged terrain, watching for predators and theft, constantly moving to find fresh grazing. Tradesmen, whether blacksmiths, potters, or carpenters, relied on brute force and precision, crafting everything from the everyday to the ceremonial. Even in cities, labor could be exhausting. Markets demanded early mornings, carrying goods long distances, and dealing with difficult customers. For many Greeks, the midday sun was oppressive. Shade was limited, and the heat could be suffocating. Olive oil, a ubiquitous product, wasn't just for cooking. It was used to protect the skin, to cleanse the body, and sometimes as a simple barrier against parasites. Life in these conditions was unforgiving, and survival required both endurance and cleverness. You learned to move efficiently, conserve energy, and protect your fragile belongings. Even leisure was rare and structured. Men might engage in exercise or wrestling in the palaestra, partly as preparation for military service or for public spectacle. Women's leisure, if it existed, was domestic, spinning, weaving, or social visits within strict confines. Conversation often revolved around survival, family obligations, or local news. Myth and storytelling offered mental escape, but in practice, these stories reinforced the values and struggles of daily life, courage, cleverness, and the consequences of human folly. By late afternoon, exhaustion settled in. Hunger returned after a long day of labor, and the evening meal, if there was one, mirrored breakfast in simplicity, but could include seasonal vegetables, pulses, and occasionally fish or meat for those who could afford it. Baths, if taken, involved communal or courtyard facilities, and the end of the day brought a mix of relief and preparation for the challenges of tomorrow. The life of an average Greek citizen was a series of physical and social tests, from the moment the sun rose until it sank below the hills. Civilization had produced philosophy, democracy, and art, but for the ordinary person, each day was a negotiation with the elements, fatigue, and social expectation. And yet, in this unyielding routine, communities thrived, traditions were forged, and the foundations of Western civilization quietly took shape. By the time night arrived, and the family gathered around the fire or straw bedding, the day's struggle had etched itself into every bone and muscle. Sleep offered no luxury, only temporary relief, as the cycle would repeat with the dawn, the sun, and the unrelenting demands of survival. This was the world of ancient Greece, dazzling in its intellectual and artistic achievements, yet harsh, grueling, and relentless for those who lived outside the gilded stories of history books. If you think you could walk a single day in their sandals, you're about to find out exactly why that would be nearly impossible.
The relentless rhythm of Greek labor. Morning had barely settled when the streets of the small village came alive with motion. The air, heavy from the previous night's heat, was already warming against your skin. Farmers, traders, and herders moved purposefully through the narrow lanes, carrying baskets of produce, water, and tools. Each step demanded attention. The uneven stones, stray animals, and scattered debris could turn a single misstep into an injury that would haunt you for days. Life required constant awareness. For the farmers, the day began with the soil. Olive groves, vineyards, and barley fields required careful attention. The earth was rocky and unyielding, and simple hand tools, a wooden plow, a hoe, or sickle, were your only means of coaxing growth. Sweat drenched tunics quickly, and muscles ached before the sun had fully claimed the sky. Each harvest or planting season was a high-stakes gamble. Rain could come too late or too early, pests could ruin months of work, and a single mistake might mean hunger in the months ahead. Herders faced a different kind of vigilance. Goats and sheep roamed rugged hillsides, and predators were a constant threat. A lone wolf, a stray dog, or even a mischievous neighbor could send your herd into chaos. Your day was spent guiding, guarding, and moving from pasture to pasture, always calculating the risks of terrain, weather, and animal behavior. There was no pause, no moment of idleness. Even meals were taken on the move: bread, lentils, and vegetables, and the occasional cheese, eaten hastily between herding duties. Tradesmen, blacksmiths, carpenters, potters worked in small workshops or open courtyards. Their labor was relentless but precise. The blacksmith's hammer struck repeatedly, shaping iron into tools and weapons, sparks dancing into the hot midday sun. Potters molded clay, their hands sticky and aching, hoping the kiln would not crack the fragile vessels before they hardened. Carpenters measured and cut, their muscles taut from repetitive effort. Mistakes were costly. A broken tool or vessel could mean a day's lost wages and a hungry family. In the marketplace, merchants shouted, bargained, and hustled, and every transaction demanded both patience and cunning. The social order structured every interaction. Men dominated the streets, trades, and fields. Women, while rarely idle, operated largely within domestic confines, spinning wool, grinding grain, cooking, and raising children. In wealthier households, women could delegate tasks to slaves or servants, but in most homes, labor was shared among the family. Children assisted from an early age, learning skills by observation and repetition. Education was minimal, often informal and entirely practical. You learned to work, to negotiate, and to survive, or you quickly fell behind. Meals were functional, fuel for the body rather than a source of pleasure. Bread, lentils, vegetables, and the occasional fish or goat meat were common. Wine diluted with water accompanied nearly every meal, a necessity to ward off contaminated water. Eating was fast and efficient. Families ate together, but social hierarchies were clear. Men often ate first, women and children after, emphasizing the rigid roles that dictated daily life. Midday brought the most punishing heat. Shade was scarce, and those working outdoors were forced to make use of whatever relief they could find: a gnarled olive tree, the shadow of a building, or a thin cloth tied overhead. Sweat poured down, mixing with dust and the occasional ash from hearth fires. You learned to conserve energy, moving deliberately and avoiding unnecessary exertion, for every wasted motion could deplete vital stamina. Trade and interaction were constant. Villages were compact, and neighbors knew each other intimately. Rumors traveled faster than the local herald, and social bonds were both a support and a constraint. Helping a neighbor meant shared labor and shared resources, but it also carried obligations. Disputes, minor thefts, and petty rivalries were daily occurrences. Surviving socially required tact, memory, and sometimes brute force. For those with military obligations, training punctuated the day. Even young boys, before they reached manhood, were exposed to wrestling, running, and weapon practice. Physical readiness was non-negotiable, as the city-state depended on every able-bodied citizen for defense. Gymnasiums and palastras were not centers of leisure alone. They were arenas of survival, preparation, and competition. Athletic skill and endurance were highly prized, not for vanity, but for life itself. Art and culture existed, but they were intertwined with survival. Stories of gods and heroes were repeated not just for entertainment, but to instill moral lessons: bravery, cunning, loyalty, and the consequences of hubris. Festivals, rituals, and public ceremonies provided temporary respite from labor, but they were tightly scheduled, costly, and socially regulated. Even the joy of music, poetry, or theater was shaped by hierarchy and tradition. Despite the relentless labor, moments of beauty persisted. The shimmer of an olive grove at sunrise, the scent of baking bread, the laughter of children chasing goats, or the glint of a bronze tool in the sun could offer fleeting reprieve. These small moments reminded citizens that life, though harsh, contained fragments of pleasure. Survival depended not just on physical endurance, but on recognizing and seizing these rare glimpses of grace. As afternoon faded, exhaustion deepened, hunger returned, muscles screamed, and the mind longed for rest. Evening meals mirrored morning sustenance, though perhaps slightly more varied: pulses, seasonal vegetables, and the occasional fish or goat meat. Water for cooking and drinking remained a scarce, precious resource, and wine diluted with water continued to dominate consumption. Families huddled around fires or simple stoves, recounting the day's labors and minor triumphs, preparing themselves mentally and physically for the challenges of the next day. Night brought little relief. Darkness in ancient Greece was complete, broken only by torchlight or moonlight. The sounds of nocturnal animals, distant voices, and the occasional patrol reminded citizens that safety was never guaranteed. Sleep offered temporary escape, but not true comfort. By the first light of dawn, the cycle would begin again: work, hunger, sun, and dust, and the relentless rhythm of survival. This was the heartbeat of Greek life, intellectually and artistically extraordinary in the abstract, yet harsh and unyielding for those who lived it. Every day was a negotiation with the sun, the soil, animals, and neighbors. Every movement carried consequences. Life demanded constant attention, relentless effort, and unwavering resolve. If you thought you could endure even a single day in this world without modern conveniences, you were about to discover exactly why survival required more than courage. It demanded adaptability, endurance, and the keenest awareness of everything around you. Hunger, hygiene, and the household struggle. By the time the sun climbed higher, the village was fully awake, and the demands of daily life pressed relentlessly on every citizen. Hunger was a constant companion. Meals were sparse, functional, and repetitive, yet without them survival was impossible. Barley bread, dense, dry, and often laced with dust or tiny insects, was the staple. Called massa, it provided minimal sustenance, but it was enough to fuel labor and keep the body moving. For those with some means, olives, cheese, figs, or honey were added sparingly. Most people relied on watered-down wine, oxos, not for pleasure, but because water could be unsafe to drink. Breakfast was brief. There were no leisurely mornings, no steaming cups of coffee, no freshly baked pastries. Eating was practical, quick bites before heading out to work or tending the home. Men consumed first, as dictated by tradition, while women and children waited their turn. The hierarchy was clear, and patience was enforced, not gently, but through social custom. Even children learned early that waiting and observing was part of life's order. After the meager morning meal, attention turned to hygiene, a task more ritual than true cleansing. Soap was unknown. Public fountains, shallow basins, or occasionally a simple bath in a courtyard were the only means of washing. Cold water, poured deliberately, helped remove the grime of labor, but it could never fully clean the sweat, dust, and oil that clung to the skin. Olive oil was the universal remedy, applied generously to the body, then scraped off with a strigil, a curved metal blade. It served as protection against insects, a makeshift moisturizer, and a superficial way to rid oneself of filth. Privacy was non-existent. The household observed every motion, and neighbors sometimes watched from the street or adjacent courtyards. Women's mornings were a relentless sequence of chores. Grain had to be ground by hand into flour, a process that could take hours for a single loaf. Water had to be fetched, often multiple trips to the well, carrying heavy clay jars balanced on the shoulder. Firewood was gathered and chopped, hearth fires stoked for cooking and meals prepared for the entire household. Children assisted when possible, but young ones often added more chaos than help. Every task demanded attention, efficiency, and patience. Men, when not in fields or workshops, might assist with communal projects, repairing walls, building small structures, or aiding in collective labor mandated by the city-state. The work was physically punishing, and skill alone did not guarantee survival. Endurance and awareness were equally important. By mid-morning, hunger returned. There was no snacking, no modern-day convenience of buying bread or cheese from a nearby shop. Instead, simple foods, bread, a few olives, maybe a smear of goat's cheese were consumed quickly between tasks. Meals were often eaten standing, sitting on the edge of a workbench or on the dusty ground. Utensils were minimal. Hands and occasionally simple wooden implements were all that existed. Eating slowly or with pleasure was a luxury no one could afford. Hygiene remained a constant concern. Sweating in the heat, laboring in dust, and interacting with animals and other humans meant filth accumulated rapidly. Strigil scraping was repeated, and sometimes the body was rubbed with scented herbs, mud, or even ash to reduce odor. Despite these efforts, lice, fleas, and other pests were a common nuisance. Clothing, typically a simple tunic or cloak, was rarely washed daily, and the combination of sweat, dust, and olive oil left the fabric stiff and stained. Meals, labor, and hygiene were deeply intertwined with survival. A single day of neglect, skipping water, delaying food, or failing to remove pests could reduce strength, slow movement, or make one susceptible to illness. Ancient Greeks were painfully aware that survival required attention to every detail, no matter how minor it seemed. Children's lives were similarly rigorous. Boys helped with field work or livestock from dawn, girls with domestic chores. Play was brief and functional, learning skills, mimicking adult labor, or small moments of mischief. Education was not formal. Lessons came from observation and imitation, often with physical consequences for mistakes. There was little room for curiosity unconnected to survival. By noon, the sun was harsh, and the air heavy with dust and smoke from fires. Shade was precious, and the laboring citizens moved deliberately to avoid exhaustion. Olive groves, small courtyards, and narrow alleyways became temporary refuges. Water breaks were taken sparingly, wine diluted with water consumed as a necessary safety measure. Physical endurance was tested every hour, every step, every motion of work. Meals returned at midday, almost indistinguishable from breakfast. Bread, lentils, olives, sometimes fish or meat for those who could afford it. Families ate quickly, discussing chores, children's behavior, or local events, but never lingering. Leisure was minimal. Small breaks existed only to preserve stamina for the remainder of the day. Afternoon brought more labor. Fields to tend, animals to move, fires to maintain, or workshops to manage. Social obligations added complexity. Neighbors might demand assistance. Disputes over water or livestock required attention, and minor thefts had to be monitored. Life demanded constant vigilance, and failure to notice even a small detail could result in injury, lost food, or social embarrassment. As the day drew to a close, exhaustion set in. Hunger had returned, muscles were sore, and minds fatigued. Evening meals mirrored the day's simplicity, but might include fresh vegetables, small portions of cheese, or occasional preserved fish. The family gathered around a small fire, recounting the day's events, sharing minor victories or frustrations. Stories of gods and heroes were recited, not only for entertainment, but as lessons in bravery, cleverness, and the consequences of hubris. Nightfall offered only temporary relief. Darkness was complete, broken only by torchlight or the pale glow of the moon. Sounds of nocturnal animals, distant neighbors, and occasional city guards filled the air. Sleep was necessary, but it offered little comfort. By dawn, the cycle would begin again: hunger, labor, dust, and the ever-present struggle to survive. In the domestic sphere, Greek life demanded endurance, precision, and awareness. Food, hygiene, and household labor were not just tasks, they were lifelines. To fail in every one aspect could imperil the entire household. Yet amidst this relentless struggle, small victories persisted. A well-cooked loaf, clean water, a child successfully learning a task. These fleeting successes gave life meaning, offering the briefest relief from the unyielding rhythm of survival. Ancient Greek daily life for the average citizen was defined by repetition, discipline, and vigilance. Civilization produced philosophy, art, and politics, but for those living outside the spotlight of Athens' assemblies or Sparta's barracks, life was a constant negotiation with reality: hunger, heat, labor, and the unceasing demands of home and community. Every day was a lesson in endurance, every task a test of skill, the pulse of the marketplace and the web of community life. By mid-morning, the village had become a living, breathing organism. Streets that were quiet at dawn now pulsed with energy, merchants shouting their wares, children weaving through the crowd, animals making their way to pasture or bens. The marketplace, or agora, was the heart of community life, far more than a place to trade goods. It was where news traveled fastest, alliances were formed, and social hierarchies were visible in every gesture, every interaction. The average Greek citizen spent hours navigating the chaos of the marketplace. Baskets brimming with olives, figs, bread, and dried fish were carried across uneven streets, each step measured carefully to avoid spills. Merchants stood at wooden stalls, their voices raised in a constant negotiation of price and quality. Haggling was not merely economic, it was a test of wit, endurance, and social acumen. A misstep, a moment of hesitation, could result in a lower profit, a lost sale, or a slight to one's reputation. Tradesmen and artisans also relied heavily on the marketplace. Potters displayed fragile amphorae, hoping buyers would value their balance and craftsmanship. Blacksmiths hammered tools and weapons in open courtyards, each spark a brief spectacle for passers-by. Carpenters and weavers displayed their goods, negotiating barter or coin. The marketplace was an open stage for skill, strength, and persuasion alike. Observation was just as vital as work. To survive here meant understanding not only commerce, but human behavior, mood, and ambition. Children, ever present, had a dual role. Some helped parents transport goods or keep an eye on livestock tethered nearby. Others mimicked adult actions, learning trade skills, bargaining, and social etiquette early. Mischief was a constant companion. A dropped basket, a stolen fig, or a playful tussle could ignite scolding or laughter in equal measure. Lessons learned in these small moments shaped how citizens would act, negotiate, and survive as adults. Women's roles extended into the community as well. They fetched water, carried goods, and supervised younger children, often navigating crowded streets alone. In wealthier households, they might interact with market vendors for luxury items or engage in delicate social negotiations. In poorer homes, efficiency was key. Carrying heavier loads, timing trips to avoid the sun's peak, and protecting family assets from opportunistic thieves. The marketplace was both opportunity and risk, a chance to gather necessities, but also a space where misfortune or misjudgment could be costly. Food scarcity was a constant, shaping both domestic and social life. While barley bread, lentils, olives, and cheese formed the stable diet, seasonal variations and local wealth influenced what was available. In some villages, a rare fish, a handful of fresh herbs, or a few figs could feel like a small triumph. Cooking was an art of practicality. Hearth fires needed tending. Dough had to rise correctly on hot stones, and meals had to stretch to feed the entire household. One poorly timed meal, a burnt loaf, or contaminated water could mean illness, wasted labor, and a day of weakened productivity. Social structure governed behavior in every interaction. Age, gender, and status dictated not only what you could eat or where you could stand, but also which conversations you could join. Young men trained and demonstrated athletic or martial skill in public, while elders offered advice, mediated disputes, and maintained order. Women navigated a subtler hierarchy, their influence indirect but no less vital, ensuring household stability, managing resources, and reinforcing social bonds. Children learned quickly that misbehavior or impatience could lead to punishment, social embarrassment, or exclusion. Religion intertwined with community and labor. Temples, shrines, and statues dotted the streets, and offerings to gods were not only acts of devotion, but practical necessities. Prayers for rain, abundant crops, protection from disease, and successful trade were commonplace. Festivals broke the daily rhythm, offering structured leisure and public celebration. But even these were bound by ritual, hierarchy, and communal obligation. The gods were ever present in thought and action. Ignoring them was not merely impolite, it was considered reckless, with potential consequences that could ripple across household and community. Daily survival required acute awareness of human behavior. Neighbors could be allies in shared labor, but disputes over water, grazing land, or debts were constant. Reputation was a currency as important as food or coin. A well-regarded citizen might negotiate better prices, gain protection, or find favors in times of need. Those who mismanaged interactions, angering a neighbor, offending a merchant, or failing to uphold promises, risked social ostracism, theft, or exploitation. Every conversation, every gesture, and even a glance could carry weight. Heat, dust, and fatigue added constant physical stress to these social challenges. The sun rose high by late morning, and shadows shrank to tiny patches beneath buildings or trees. Sweat collected beneath tunics, muscles screamed from labor, and the risk of sunstroke or exhaustion was ever present. Water was rationed carefully, and brief moments of shade were precious. Those with physical endurance and social savvy had a distinct advantage. Weakness or misjudgment could result in illness, lost goods, or lost respect. As the day wore on, the rhythm of labor, social interaction, and survival continued unabated. Goods were collected, meals were prepared, and disputes resolved. Children returned home from assisting or observing the marketplace, carrying lessons about negotiation, observation, and endurance. Meals mirrored earlier patterns, simple, practical, and functional, punctuated by diluted wine or limited water. Privacy remained inaccessible, and domestic spaces were crowded with the tools, goods, and animals essential to life. Evenings offered brief respite, but vigilance never fully relaxed. Fires burned to prepare the final meal. Livestock was secured, and young children were watched closely. Conversations often revisited the day's successes, missteps, or lessons learned. Stories of gods, heroes, and ancestors were recited to entertain and instruct, reinforcing cultural values that intertwined survival with morality, cleverness, and courage. Night in ancient Greece was deep and complete. Torchlight illuminated small areas, the moon offered pale guidance, and the sounds of nocturnal creatures, distant voices, and occasional city guards reminded citizens that danger never fully disappeared. Sleep was essential, yet never luxurious. By dawn, the cycle would restart. Marketplace bustle, labor, negotiation, hunger, and vigilance. Life in the community was a constant balance of opportunity and risk, work and social navigation, endurance and adaptation. Every citizen learned early that survival depended not solely on physical strength, but on intelligence, observation, and the ability to respond swiftly to challenges. The streets were more than paths, they were stages where social, economic, and personal battles unfolded, shaping the rhythm of Greek life from sunrise to nightfall. This was the pulse of the Greek village, relentless, intricate, and alive. Civilization had produced philosophy, democracy, and art, yet for the average citizen, daily life demanded constant negotiation with nature, neighbors, and circumstance. The marketplace was not merely a place of trade. It was a crucible where survival, reputation, and skill were continuously tested, preparing citizens for the broader challenges of life in ancient Greece. Fields of struggle and the rhythm of the seasons. The sun rose over the fields, a blazing orb that seemed almost too bright to behold. The rural landscape stretched endlessly, golden barley swaying in the wind, olive trees standing stubbornly against rocky soil, and the occasional goat or sheep grazing under the careful eye of their herder. For most Greeks, life began and ended with the land. To survive, one had to understand its rhythms, its moods, and its unforgiving nature. Agriculture was not merely a profession, it was a daily negotiation with fate. Barley, wheat, olives, and grapes demanded precise timing, constant care, and brutal labor. A single miscalculation could mean a month of back-breaking work lost to a sudden frost, a late storm, or a swarm of locusts. Farmers learned to read the skies, the soil, and the subtle signals of nature because survival depended on it. Each day, from dawn until the sun hovered mercilessly overhead, labor was relentless. Tools were simple but essential. Wooden plows dragged through tough earth, hand sickles harvested ripened grain, and baskets were used to carry produce across uneven terrain. The sweat of labor was constant. Muscles screamed, skin baked under the sun, and blisters formed quickly. Even the simplest tasks, digging a trench for irrigation, tying grapevines, or pruning an olive tree, required precision, endurance, and vigilance. Every mistake was visible, often permanent, and always costly. Seasonal rhythms dictated life more than any clock or calendar. Spring brought the planting of grains, the careful tending of young shoots, and the hope of rain. Summer meant irrigation, weeding, and protecting crops from insects or animals. Harvest time in late summer and early autumn was grueling, long days bending over, cutting stalks, binding sheaves, and carrying them to storage. Autumn also brought olives and grapes, whose processing, pressing, fermenting, curing was a laborious task demanding both skill and teamwork. Winter slowed much of the activity, but survival chores continued, tending animals, repairing buildings, and preparing food stores for the cold months. Children's labor was essential. From a young age, they learned to recognize edible plants, carry small baskets, and herd animals. These lessons were not taught gently, but with expectation. A dropped basket or wandering goat could mean scolding or correction. Skill was honed through repetition, endurance through exposure to harsh sun and unpredictable weather, and awareness through constant observation of adults and nature alike. Herders played a vital role in the rural economy. Goats, sheep, and cattle required near constant attention. Predators were always a threat. Wolves, wild dogs, and even rival herders could endanger livestock. Movement was essential. Pastures had to be rotated, water sources monitored, and animals inspected daily for disease or injury. A day in the hills demanded stamina, knowledge of the terrain, and sometimes sheer cunning to protect valuable livestock from theft or attack. Even within these grueling routines, Greeks sought efficiency and small moments of relief. Olive oil, a ubiquitous and versatile commodity, was applied to the skin to protect against sunburn, parasites, and irritation. Bread baked in community ovens or on hot stones offered brief sustenance, while diluted wine refreshed and helped cleanse water from impurities. Despite the drudgery, ingenuity abounded. Storing produce carefully, creating rudimentary irrigation channels, and developing simple tools to ease repetitive labor were essential survival skills. Social connections intertwined with survival. Neighbors worked together during harvests, helping each other lift heavy loads, prune trees, or press grapes. These collaborations were both practical and strategic. Aiding others ensured reciprocal support in times of hardship. Yet the rural world was also competitive. Disputes over water access, grazing rights, or the boundaries of fields could erupt into tension or even violence. Maintaining a balance between cooperation and vigilance was essential. Evening brought a temporary lull, but work never truly ceased. Crops had to be stored safely, animals secured, and fires lit for cooking or warmth. Simple meals, bread, lentils, olives, and occasionally preserved meat, sustained the body but could not soothe the fatigue. Every day demanded preparation for the next, because the land did not forgive laziness, and neither did the community. Festivals and religious rituals punctuated the harsh labor, offering moments of respite. Seasonal celebrations honored gods of agriculture, fertility, and protection. These events, though brief, were vital psychologically and socially. They reminded citizens that survival was not just about physical labor, but about belonging, belief, and observation of tradition. Even the briefest distraction, a shared dance, a communal meal, or storytelling, offered temporary relief from the relentless demands of the field. As darkness fell, the rural world transformed. Fires flickered in homes and courtyards, animals settled for the night, and the scent of cooking food mingled with the cool evening air. Exhaustion pressed on every citizen, but awareness never fully relaxed. Predators lurked, weather could change suddenly, and stolen crops or missing animals demanded vigilance. Sleep offered no luxury. It was a pause in preparation for the next day's battle with the sun, soil, and relentless demands of survival. In the fields and hills of ancient Greece, life was measured in work, endurance, and observation. Each day was a test of skill, physical capacity, and social awareness. Civilization's great achievements, philosophy, politics, and art, were distant ideals for the average farmer, whose primary concern was survival. Yet in this struggle, a culture of resilience, observation, and ingenuity thrived. Knowledge of the land, community dynamics, and seasonal rhythms became a kind of intelligence as vital as philosophy in Athens or military strategy in Sparta. Survival depended on rhythm, routine, and constant attention. Those who could endure the relentless sun, manage the workload, negotiate with neighbors, and interpret the signals of the land survived. Those who faltered often faded quietly from history, their struggles recorded only in the crops they failed to harvest or the animals they lost to neglect or misfortune. Ancient Greek rural life was a crucible of endurance, a relentless test of skill and adaptability. Each day taught lessons in patience, vigilance, and resourcefulness. The land dictated the pace, the community enforced order, and survival required a combination of strength, intelligence, and observation. In this way, the foundation of Greek civilization was built not only in grand temples and philosophical schools, but in the sweat, toil, and vigilance of ordinary people navigating an unforgiving world.
The city wakes before the sun. From the rooftops, the world looks calm. Soft orange light spilling over tiled roofs and marble temples. But beneath that glow lies a constant hum. The sound of sandals scraping over stone, merchants shouting in the agora, roosters calling, slaves hauling amphorae filled with water or wine. Athens is alive before most have opened their eyes. For the rural farmer, life is tied to the soil, but for the city dweller, survival is a different kind of battle, one fought with noise, crowds, ambition, and the endless rhythm of trade and gossip. Here, in the beating heart of ancient Greece, civilization shines brightest and rots fastest. A city like Athens is both magnificent and merciless. Its skyline is a mixture of grandeur and grime. Marble temples glint in the sunlight, but beneath them, narrow alleys twist through districts thick with smoke, sweat, and whispers. The Parthenon stands like a crown, yet most citizens live in small, cramped homes made of clay and timber. No plumbing, no ventilation, and a smell that never quite goes away. The air is heavy with dust and dreams. Philosophers gather in shaded courtyards, debating the meaning of justice and truth. Merchants display their wares, spices from the east, pottery from Corinth, fish from the coast, while citizens haggle, argue, and watch everything with suspicion. Every sale, every handshake, every casual glance could be the start of a fortune or a fight. Public life revolves around the agora, the great marketplace and social hub. It's here that you find the pulse of the city, its politics, its rumors, and its theater of human behavior. Men debate laws, shout about democracy, or whisper about corruption. Orators stand on stone platforms, voices booming over the crowd, convincing citizens that their words can shape destiny. Behind them, pickpockets move through the crowd with quiet precision, stealing purses from those too distracted by politics to guard their own coin. Democracy in Athens is not what most modern minds imagine. Yes, citizens vote, argue, and hold assemblies, but citizens means men, and not even all men. Women, slaves, and foreigners have no voice in the system that boasts of freedom. Politics is loud, theatrical, and full of ego. Each man believes he can change the city. Most cannot even change their own fates. Still, there's a kind of magic in it all. Where else can a potter's son stand beside an aristocrat in the assembly? Where else can an idea, just an idea, carry more weight than gold? Here, words are weapons, and wit is armor. To survive, one must learn to speak well, listen better, and remember always that the wrong opinion, spoken at the wrong time, can destroy you. Amid the crowds, slaves move quietly, eyes lowered. They are everywhere, tending fires, fetching water, cleaning workshops, carrying goods. They make the city function, but are invisible to most who depend on them. For some, slavery is punishment for debt or war. For others, it's a birthright of suffering. They live, serve, and fade without names recorded in history, their labor building the temples and homes that others claim as glory. Daily life in the city demands adaptability. You rise early because work begins with the sun. Artisans craft pottery, bronze tools, or sandals. Blacksmiths hammer out weapons and nails, sparks flying into the smoky air. Fishmongers yell over the din, their stalls reeking of salt and decay. Bakers stoke their ovens, filling the air with the rare sweetness of fresh bread. For the poor, work is endless and pay is small. For the rich, the city is a theater of pleasure and politics. Food is simple: bread, olives, lentils, and, if luck favors you, a sliver of dried fish or cheese. The midday heat drives many indoors. Houses, dim and cool, offer brief relief, but little comfort. The afternoon brings a second wave of activity. Markets reopen, gossip flows again, and the streets filled with the sounds of children playing, dogs barking, and distant music from flutes and lyres. Evening in the city is something else entirely. Torches flicker to life, their flames dancing against stone walls. Taverns fill with laughter, argument, and song. Wine flows thick and sharp, diluted with water, but still strong enough to make the world blur at the edges. Men speak of heroes, wars, and gods, of how Achilles was born mortal, yet remembered immortal, of how the Spartans fear no man, and how the gods might still walk among them, disguised as beggars or lovers. But beneath the celebration lies unease. The city is never truly safe. Theft, disease, and fire are constant threats. The narrow streets are crowded and dry. One spark, one accident, and an entire district can burn before help arrives. Medicine is primitive: herbs, prayers, and the occasional leech, and hygiene is a luxury few can afford. Public fountains provide water for all, but also spread sickness to those unlucky enough to drink after the wrong person. Still, Athenians are proud. They believe themselves the most civilized people alive, surrounded by barbarians and imitators. They worship not just gods, but beauty, art, and the mind itself. Their theaters are grand, their poets divine, their philosophers dangerous. To question the gods is risky, but to question ideas, that's the very soul of Athens. At night, the city breathes differently. The streets quiet down, torches fade, and the scent of olive smoke hangs over everything. A few drunk voices echo through the alleys, followed by the distant sound of sandals slapping stone. Somewhere in the darkness, a stray dog barks at the moon. Inside small homes, families settle in the dim glow of oil lamps. Children fall asleep to the murmur of distant music. Outside, the marble columns of temples gleam faintly under starlight, ancient, patient, and indifferent. For every soul that dreams of greatness, another simply dreams of rest. In the end, life in the city is no less a struggle than life in the fields. The weapons are different: words instead of plows, schemes instead of storms, but the fight is the same: to eat, to endure, to matter. And yet, within that struggle, something extraordinary grows, the human spirit refusing to break. Every marketplace argument, every shared loaf of bread, every whispered prayer to Athena adds another thread to the vast tapestry of Greek civilization. A city built by ambition and held together by desperation, Athens is both the brightest flame of the ancient world and the smoke that hides its shadows. Love, power, and the masks we wear. Morning in Athens begins with the same golden light, but what happens behind the walls of its homes is far from ordinary. The city may be built on marble, but its foundations are made of people, and people, no matter how noble or wise they claim to be, are driven by the same ancient forces: love, pride, jealousy, and hunger. If the agora is the heart of the city, the home is its soul, though often it's a soul split in two. Men and women live in the same house, yet their worlds rarely touch. The Athenian man wakes, stretches, and prepares for a day in public life, debate, trade, or politics. His wife rises earlier to command the private kingdom of the household: servants, children, food, and quiet control. She rarely leaves the house, but within its walls she is law. Marriage in Greece is not a love story. It is an arrangement, a business of bloodlines and alliances. Girls are married by 14, sometimes younger. Husbands are often twice their age. A dowry exchanges hands, not affection. And yet, despite the cold structure, something human often finds its way through. A shared glance across a meal, a hand brushing against another, a laugh that shouldn't be heard, but is. For the men of Athens, love is a complicated theater. They praise reason and philosophy, but their hearts are ruled by chaos. The same man who argues about virtue in the assembly might slip away to the shadows of the gymnasium, where beauty and youth are worshipped like divine gifts. Desire, both spoken and unspoken, floats through every level of the city, from poets to potters, generals to slaves. Affection is both sacred and scandalous. Poets like Sappho sing of longing and tenderness that defies law or gender. In taverns, love is bought for a few coins. In symposia, it is debated over wine and music. The Greeks do not hide from passion. They give it a stage, a name, and sometimes even a god. Aphrodite and Eros are not metaphors. They are constant presences, unpredictable and intoxicating. But love is not only pleasure, it's a currency of power. The wealthy host grand feasts, inviting influential guests and entertainers to build networks of loyalty and attraction. Alliances are made not just with handshakes, but with glances. A rumor whispered in the wrong ear can ruin reputations overnight. Jealousy, especially among the powerful, is a silent poison that drips through Athenian society. Women live in its shadow. Officially, they have no voice in politics, no vote, no public power. But behind closed doors, they are far from powerless. A sharp word, a well-placed suggestion, or even silence can shift the balance of a household, and sometimes even of history itself. Mothers shape the minds of future soldiers and philosophers. Wives keep family wealth intact. Courtesans influence leaders with beauty, wit, and a kind of freedom respectable wives will never know. Take the heterae, educated, independent women who live outside the rules of conventional marriage. They dine with philosophers, discuss politics, and command attention in ways Athenian wives cannot. Men worship them and fear them at once. They are both muse and mirror, reminding the city's thinkers that wisdom does not belong to one gender. Still, even in this complex world, the line between admiration and accusation is thin. A woman too outspoken risks being branded dangerous. A man too emotional is mocked as weak. Athens loves passion, but demands restraint. It celebrates beauty, but punishes those who break its unspoken rules. The contradiction is everywhere, etched in its temples, echoed in its plays, lived in its streets. At night, when the torches burn low and the city hum quiets, another Athens awakens. In the courtyards and rooftop terraces, secrets move like smoke.
Lovers meet in silence. Deals are struck beneath starlight. The laughter of courtesans mixes with the soft music of flutes. From the high steps of the Acropolis to the back rooms of shadowed taverns, the city breathes desire and deceit in equal measure. Philosophers speak of ideals, of virtue, truth, and the soul, but the streets know better. Real life is not made of ideals, it's made of compromise. The same man who lectures on moderation might stumble home drunk. The same woman praised for loyalty might keep a secret that could destroy her husband. Morality in Athens is not a line, it's a dance, and everyone wears a mask. Religion only deepens the paradox. The gods themselves are no moral guides. They are reflections of human vice and virtue. Zeus cheats, Hera plots, Aphrodite tempts, and Ares burns with rage. The Greeks do not worship perfection. They worship recognition. The gods behave like them, flawed, brilliant, and endlessly unpredictable. Perhaps that's why the people of Athens accept contradiction so easily. To be human, after all, is to live in conflict with yourself. By midnight, the city cools under the starlit sky. The faint smell of smoke and wine lingers in the air. Somewhere a poet scribbles verses about a love he can't confess. Somewhere else, a wife stares out her window, wondering if her husband will return or if he's found warmth in another home tonight. And beneath it all, the hum of the city continues, quiet but alive. Every laugh, every sigh, every lie whispered in the dark adds another layer to the story of Greece. Not the Greece of statues and philosophy, but the Greece of flesh and feeling, a place where brilliance and weakness live side by side, and where even the wisest soul is still ruled by the heart. Because for all their talk of reason and perfection, the Greeks knew one truth that still echoes through time. No matter how advanced a civilization becomes, it is built on the same raw desires that shape every life: love, fear, and the desperate need to be remembered.
The Spartan way, born to endure, trained to obey. Dawn breaks differently in Sparta. No gentle golden light, no smell of bread from a city oven, no lazy chatter of the marketplace. The Spartan sunrise is sharp, cold, and uninviting, a warning, not a welcome. Here, comfort is weakness. Every breath, every heartbeat, every child born beneath this sky belongs not to themselves, but to the state. If Athens is a theater of thought and words, Sparta is a forge. Its people are hammered into warriors, its children molded into soldiers long before they can spell their own names. For the Spartans, survival isn't a question of luck or labor. It is a discipline carved into bone and blood. A newborn's first test begins within moments of birth. The elders inspect the baby, checking the limbs, the chest, the eyes. If the child looks weak or sickly, it's taken away, abandoned in the cold foothills of Mount Taygetus. No tears, no mourning. Sparta doesn't nurture weakness, it eliminates it. To the modern mind, it's monstrous, but to a Spartan, it's mercy. Mercy for the state, not the child. Those who survive grow up in a world without softness. At the age of 7, boys are taken from their homes and sent to the Agoge, the state-run military school that defines every Spartan male's existence. There are no mothers here, no comfort, no personal belongings, only discipline. They sleep on reed mats, often without blankets. They eat little, deliberately underfed to learn hunger, to learn theft, to learn silence. If they steal food and get caught, they're not punished for stealing. They're punished for getting caught. Every day is a test. The mornings begin with training, running barefoot across rough terrain, wrestling, spear drills, shield drills, endurance drills. By noon, their bodies ache,
Their feet bleed, their minds sharpen. They are taught not just to fight, but to obey. Obedience is not optional, it is survival. To hesitate is to die. To question is to fail. And yet, within that brutality, a strange pride grows. The boys become brothers, forged in hardship, united in silence. They learn to read the sky for signs of weather, to move without sound, to strike without mercy. Their voices are trained to be calm under pressure, their eyes to hide pain. By 15, they can endure cold, hunger, and beatings without flinching. The Agoge doesn't build men, it builds weapons. Women, too, live differently here. Spartan girls are not shut away like in Athens. They run, wrestle, and train because strong mothers make strong sons. They speak their minds, manage estates, and command respect. When Spartan men march to war, it's their wives who maintain the city and remind them, "Come back with your shield," or "on it." No Spartan mother weeps for a fallen son. She honors him. At 20, a Spartan becomes a soldier in full, a hoplite, part of the most feared military machine of the ancient world. The hoplite is no lone hero. He's a cog in the wall of bronze known as the phalanx. Shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield, each man's protection depends on the one beside him. They move like a living creature, a single, deadly organism advancing with terrifying unity. There are no individuals in a phalanx, only parts of a perfect whole. And this unity is what makes Sparta legendary. Their discipline terrifies enemies, their silence unnerves them. They don't boast like Athenians, they act. A Spartan warrior speaks rarely, fights fiercely, and dies without complaint. For them, war isn't chaos, it's order. Death in service of the state is not tragedy, it's fulfillment. Their enemies often mock their simplicity. They have no grand temples, no literature, no sculpture. But Spartans' art is the human body, its strength, its precision, its endurance. They craft warriors the way Athens crafts philosophers. And in a world where power decides truth, Sparta's truth is iron. But even perfection has a price. The same system that forges invincible warriors also breeds fear. Every Spartan is haunted by rebellion, not from foreign invaders, but from the enslaved population beneath them, the Helots. These are conquered peoples, bound to the land, outnumbering Spartans 10 to 1. They farm, labor, and feed the warrior state, yet live under constant threat of death. Each year, young Spartans are sent to hunt them, not for food, but for fear, to remind the Helots who rules, and to remind the soldiers what obedience costs. So even in peace, Sparta lives at war, against its enemies, its slaves, and its own humanity. No laughter rings through the streets, no festivals fill the air with song. The city is quiet, clean, and watchful. Beauty here is not marble or poetry, it's discipline. Weakness is the only sin. And yet there's a strange kind of beauty in this hardness. In a world where most cities are torn apart by greed or ego, Sparta endures, a machine of flesh and purpose. Its people may not be free in spirit, but they are unbreakable in body and mind. Every scar is a story, every bruise a lesson, every grave a symbol of loyalty. When night falls, the torches burn low along the training fields. The wind carries the faint sound of shields clanging and voices shouting the same command. Hold the line. That's Spartan's entire philosophy in 3 words. Hold the line. Against hunger, against fear, against the weakness that lives in every human heart. The stars above the city glimmer coldly. The boys in training whisper to each other of the day they'll earn their place among the warriors. The elders, seated in silence, watch them and remember their own battles long past.
Every generation bleeds to prepare the next. Every dawn repeats the same ritual of endurance. In this world, softness is extinction. Strength is existence. And as the rest of Greece debates art, poetry, and democracy, the Spartans remain silent, their message carved not in words, but in the steel of their spears and the unyielding rhythm of their march.
The Clash of Titans, Athens versus Sparta. The Greek world was never meant to be one. It was 1,000 sparks scattered across a rough landscape, mountains dividing cities, seas connecting them again, pride splitting them apart. And at the center of it all stood two forces so opposite they almost seemed born to destroy each other, Athens and Sparta. To the Athenians, life was a conversation. To the Spartans, it was a command. One thrived on thought, the other on silence. One built beauty, the other built fear. And yet both believed their way was the only way civilization could survive. The seeds of their rivalry were planted long before their first battle. Athens sat by the sea, open, restless, hungry for ideas. Its harbors were full of merchants, ships, and travelers from distant lands, bringing new words, new art, new gods. Debate was as common as bread. Even the poorest citizen could stand in the agora and argue politics or philosophy. The Athenians believed in the power of speech, the idea that truth could be shaped by logic and shared through persuasion. But Sparta, landlocked and stern, looked at this noisy democracy with suspicion. They saw chatter where there should be silence, debate where there should be obedience. To them, Athens was soft, a city of dreamers who mistook talk for strength. They didn't understand how a city could function when everyone was allowed to speak. Freedom to Sparta was just another word for chaos. Their conflict was inevitable, like storm clouds drawn to lightning. It began not with hatred, but with fear. Fear of losing power, fear of change. When the Persian Empire invaded Greece, both Athens and Sparta fought side by side to defend their land. The battles of Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis turned Greek warriors into legends. But even in victory, the alliance cracked. The Persians were gone, yet the question remained, who would lead Greece now? Athens rose first. With its navy unmatched, its economy booming, it formed the Delian League, an alliance of city-states meant to protect Greece from future threats. But power has a way of corrupting ideals. Soon, the League became an empire in all but name. Athens demanded tribute, ships, gold, and soldiers from its allies. Those who resisted were crushed. Democracy at home, domination abroad. Sparta watched in silence, seething. To them, Athens had become the very tyranny it claimed to oppose. So they formed their own league, the Peloponnesian League, uniting states that feared or hated Athenian control. The stage was set for the greatest civil war the ancient world had ever seen, the Peloponnesian War. When war finally came, it was not glorious. It was long, brutal, and bitter. Athens ruled the seas, Sparta ruled the land. Each city tried to outlast the other, choking trade, raiding farms, spreading famine. The Greeks, who once stood together against Persia, now slaughtered each other under the same sun. The gods, it seemed, watched in silence, as if unsure which side to favor. In Athens, the people gathered daily to debate strategy, to vote, to blame. The same democracy that had made them powerful now made them divided. One voice cried for peace, another for conquest. Speeches filled the air, but their navy filled the seas with blood. In Sparta, there were no debates, no grand speeches. Orders were given and men obeyed. They marched with the same quiet rhythm as before, steady, relentless, unstoppable. The war stretched on for 27 years. Generations were born and died knowing nothing but the sound of oars and the smell of burning cities. Plagues swept through Athens, killing thousands, including their greatest leader, Pericles. The Parthenon still shone above the city, but its people starved beneath it. The birthplace of democracy had become a city of graves. Still, Athens refused to surrender. Even in ruin, their pride burned like a torch refusing to die out. They sent armies, fleets, and generals across the seas, desperate for one more chance at victory. But Sparta had found an unlikely ally, Persia, their old enemy. With Persian gold, they built a fleet to rival Athens' own. And when the final battle came, it wasn't on land or in the grand halls of debate. It was at sea, where Athens once ruled supreme. At Aegospotami, the Athenian navy was ambushed and destroyed. Thousands of sailors were killed, thousands more captured. The city's walls, once symbols of safety, now felt like a prison. When the Spartan army finally surrounded Athens, there was no hope left. The people who once claimed they could talk their way out of anything stood silent. In 404 BCE, Athens surrendered. Its empire was gone, its democracy humbled. Sparta had won, but victory came with a cost. The city that lived for war now had no war left to fight. Without an enemy, their iron discipline began to rust. The soldiers who had spent their lives obeying orders found themselves lost in peace. And the Greeks, as a whole, learned a cruel truth. When two great ideals clash, freedom and order, both can shatter. In the years that followed, Athens rebuilt itself, slower, wiser, still full of thinkers and artists. Sparta, on the other hand, began to fade, its population shrinking, its strict codes suffocating the very strength it once created. Their triumph over Athens marked the beginning of their decline. Yet their story didn't end in defeat. Together, Athens and Sparta left behind two legacies that shaped the Western world. From Athens came the dream of democracy, philosophy, and art, the belief that humans could govern themselves and think freely. From Sparta came discipline, endurance, and order. The idea that strength must have purpose and freedom must have cost. Even today, the echoes of their rivalry still shape us. Every modern nation, every army, every classroom carries a piece of that ancient conflict, the struggle between voice and command, between mind and muscle, between what is right and what must be done. As the dust settled over the broken walls of Athens, the sun rose again on a changed Greece. The war was over, but the lessons had only begun.
The young conqueror, Alexander, crosses the world. The sun rose over the Macedonian hills, painting the sky in streaks of gold and fire. The morning wind carried the clang of armor and the steady rhythm of marching feet. At the head of the army rode a young man barely in his 20s, his gaze fixed eastward, his expression calm yet burning with something fierce and unstoppable. His name was Alexander, son of Philip, student of Aristotle, and heir to a dream larger than Greece itself. For the Greeks, war was nothing new. They had fought Persians, fought each other, fought the very gods in myth. But this was something else. Alexander was not marching to defend his land. He was marching to unite the world under one name, one vision, one destiny. When he crossed the Hellespont in 334 BCE, the narrow sea between Europe and Asia, he stopped his chariot, leapt into the water, and threw a spear into the Asian shore. "From this land," he declared, "I claim a world." To his men, it was a bold act of faith. To history, it was the beginning of a legend. His army was small,
barely 40,000 men, a mix of hardened Macedonians, Greeks, and allies. Against them stood the Persian Empire, millions strong, with gold, horses, and cities that shone like stars. But Alexander had something no Persian king possessed: unbreakable belief. His soldiers didn't just fight for a paycheck, they fought for him. To them, Alexander wasn't a ruler, he was destiny in human form. Their first test came at the Battle of the Granicus River. Persian satraps, local governors, waited on the opposite bank, confident the young Macedonian would hesitate. But Alexander didn't wait. He charged his cavalry straight into the river, water splashing against his armor as arrows hissed past his head. His men followed, roaring his name. The Persians broke. By sunset, Asia Minor belonged to Alexander. He moved like fire, fast, unpredictable, consuming everything in his path. Cities that resisted were destroyed. Those that surrendered were spared and welcomed into his vision of a new world. Unlike most conquerors, Alexander didn't just take land, he absorbed it. He spoke of a fusion between Greek and Eastern cultures, a world where art, philosophy, and language would mix like rivers joining the sea. His empire wasn't only built with swords, but with ideas. But ideas must march with discipline. His men followed him across mountains, deserts, and endless plains. They ate little, slept less, and fought constantly. But whenever they faltered, Alexander rode among them, no armor shining, no throne behind him, just another man in the dust. He shared their bread, their water, their pain, and that made him unstoppable. Next came the Battle of Issus, one of history's most famous encounters. The Persian king Darius III himself led an army said to outnumber Alexander's by hundreds of thousands. When Darius saw the Macedonian line charging, he expected them to break. Instead, Alexander's wedge of cavalry cut straight through the center of the Persian formation, a spear aimed directly at the king himself. Darius fled the field. His royal chariot was left behind, his family captured. The son of Macedonia had just defeated the master of Asia. But Alexander didn't gloat. When Darius's mother fell at his feet, begging for mercy, Alexander lifted her gently and said, "You have nothing to fear, for I am not Darius, but still your king." That single gesture spread through Persia like wildfire. The conqueror was not a barbarian. He was something else, something almost divine. From Issus, Alexander turned south, following the coastline through Phoenicia. One by one, the great cities surrendered, all except Tyre, an island fortress that mocked him from the sea. So Alexander did the impossible. He built a causeway, a bridge of earth and stone stretching half a mile across the water just to reach the city's walls. It took 7 months, thousands of men, and unimaginable will. When Tyre finally fell, it wasn't just a victory. It was a message to the world. No wall was too high, no sea too deep, no enemy too strong. Next came Egypt. The Persians ruled it, but the Egyptians had long grown weary of foreign kings. When Alexander entered their land, they welcomed him as a liberator. He traveled along the Nile, visited ancient temples, and even made a pilgrimage across the desert to the Oracle of Amun at Siwa. There, priests greeted him as Son of Zeus. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. Alexander believed it, and when a man believes he's divine, there's nothing he cannot attempt. At the mouth of the Nile he founded a city, Alexandria, destined to become one of the greatest in history. It would hold the wisdom of the world, a library to preserve all knowledge, a city where East and West would meet. Even as he conquered, Alexander dreamed of what would come after,
a civilization beyond borders. But dreams don't rest. News reached him that Darius had rebuilt his army, larger than ever, and waited in the heart of Mesopotamia. Alexander didn't hesitate. He left Egypt, marched through the burning desert, and met the Persians near a town called Gaugamela. There, under a sky of dust and fire, the fate of an empire would be decided. The Persians outnumbered him 5-1. Their war elephants shook the ground. Darius rode at the center, surrounded by his royal guard. But Alexander's plan was perfect. He feigned retreat, drawing the Persians into confusion, then cut through the opening like a lightning strike. Again, Darius fled, his empire shattered. Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, the jewels of the ancient world, fell one after another. When Alexander entered Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Persia, he walked through halls lined with golden statues and carved reliefs of kings who once ruled the earth. For a moment, he stood silent, staring at the walls. Then he gave the order to burn it. Flames climbed into the night, devouring centuries of power. Whether it was vengeance for Greece or a drunken impulse, no one knew. But in that blaze, the old world died. Now the boy from Macedonia ruled from the Aegean to the edge of India. No man had ever conquered so much so fast. But conquest is a hunger that cannot be sated. Even as the ashes of Persia cooled, Alexander looked east again, toward lands even the Persians had never tamed. India. There, beyond rivers and jungles, he would find not just enemies, but the limits of his own humanity.
Into the edge of the world, the Indian campaign. The road to India began not with fanfare, but with silence, the kind of silence that falls before storms or miracles. Alexander stood on a cliff above the eastern plains, gazing across a horizon that shimmered like molten gold under the blazing sun. Behind him stretched the ruins of Persia, conquered and claimed. Before him lay the unknown, a land of dense jungles, fierce rivers, and people who spoke languages even his interpreters had never heard. To his men, it felt like stepping off the edge of the world. To Alexander, it was destiny calling one last time. The march eastward tested them like never before. The Persian plains turned into mountains, the air grew heavier, and every mile felt longer than the last. Soldiers who had followed him since Greece began to grumble in the shadows of their campfires. They missed their families, their homes, the taste of wine and the laughter of familiar voices. But Alexander's will was like iron. He promised them riches beyond imagination, glory that would outlive marble, and a place in the stories of gods. Crossing into what is now Pakistan, Alexander faced the Hindu Kush mountains, brutal, ice-covered giants that crushed armies with their silence. The wind there could slice through armor. The snow buried both man and beast alike. Yet he pushed on. Men wrapped themselves in animal skins and prayed their fires wouldn't die in the night. Horses stumbled, pack animals froze, and food grew scarce. But whenever despair crept in, they'd see Alexander walking among them, cloak whipping in the icy wind, his face calm, his voice steady. "Endure this with me, and the world will remember your names." When they finally descended from the mountains, the land below was lush and green, a paradise compared to the wasteland they'd crossed. Rivers shimmered through valleys, and fields stretched endlessly. But it wasn't empty. This was the land of the Indian kings, where elephants marched like living fortresses, and archers could pierce armor from the shadows of the forest. The first to challenge him was King Porus,
ruler of the land beyond the Hydaspes River. Porus was no ordinary king. He was tall, broad, and rode into battle on a war elephant adorned with gold and scarlet. His army was vast, disciplined, and utterly unafraid. When Alexander's scouts returned describing what they saw, even his toughest generals hesitated. Elephants were beasts of terror to the Greeks, towers of flesh and fury that could trample men and horses alike. But retreat was not in Alexander's nature. He studied the terrain, waited for the monsoon rains to subside, and prepared for one of the most audacious battles of his career. Under the cover of a violent storm, he led a small force upstream, crossing the swollen river in darkness and silence. The wind beat down like arrows, the thunder masking every sound. When dawn came, Porus looked out across the misty water and realized too late that the Macedonians were already upon him. The Battle of the Hydaspes began with chaos. Elephants charged through the mud, crushing soldiers beneath their feet. Horses panicked, throwing riders into the water. The air was filled with screams, thunder, and the clash of steel. But Alexander's tactics, precise, flexible, and fearless, turned the tide. He darted around the flanks, his cavalry cutting into the enemy lines, while his infantry pinned them down. He aimed not to destroy Porus, but to break his formation, to separate the elephants from their handlers. Hours later, drenched in blood and rain, the Indian army began to falter. Porus, towering atop his wounded elephant, refused to surrender. He fought until his weapon broke, until his men dragged him away from certain death. When he was finally brought before Alexander, bound, bruised, and bleeding, the conqueror looked at him for a long moment and asked, "How would you wish to be treated?" Porus replied, "As a king would treat a king." Alexander smiled, "Then that is how you shall be treated." Instead of destroying him, Alexander restored Porus to his throne, even granting him more territory. It was a gesture that stunned everyone. Conquerors burned cities. Alexander built alliances. He saw in Porus not an enemy, but a reflection of himself, proud, defiant, unbroken. That day, two worlds met, and for a moment they understood each other. After Hydaspes, the Greek army expected to return home, but Alexander's ambition burned brighter than ever. He wanted to go further, to see what lay beyond the next river, the next mountain. His map spoke of oceans, strange kingdoms, and lands where gold ran in streams. But his soldiers had reached their limit. They had marched for years, fought countless battles, and buried too many friends. In their eyes, the gods themselves had already given Alexander the world. What more could he possibly want? At the banks of the Hyphasis River, the army refused to march on. It was the first time in Alexander's life that his command met resistance, not from an enemy, but from his own men. They stood in silence as he begged, argued, even wept. "Do you fear hardship? Do you not wish to see the edge of the world?" But their silence said everything. They wanted to live. They wanted home. At last, Alexander turned his horse toward the west. He had conquered everything he could see, and yet in that moment he felt smaller than he ever had before. The God who never stopped now had to turn back. The march home was as brutal as any battle. Instead of returning through Persia, Alexander decided to explore the Gedrosian desert, a decision that would haunt him. The sands burned like fire by day and froze at night. Thousands died of thirst. Even Alexander, who walked beside his men, refused to drink more water than the lowest soldier. Once, when a scout brought him a small helmet filled with water, he poured it on the ground.
He said, "If my men cannot drink, neither will I." By the time they reached civilization again, their army was shattered. The man who had crossed empires now carried the weight of ghosts. But even broken, Alexander still dreamed. He rebuilt cities, organized trade, and began planning the unthinkable, the unification of his vast empire under a single rule. He married a Persian princess, encouraged his generals to do the same, and spoke of blending East and West into one great civilization. No conqueror had ever thought like this before. Yet beneath the surface, discontent brewed. His generals whispered. His old soldiers wondered if the boy who had led them out of Greece was still the same man, or if the gods had finally taken him for their own. And as Alexander returned to Babylon, the city where his empire had begun, destiny waited for him one final time.
The shadow of greatness, Alexander's final years. The world lay at Alexander's feet. From the hills of Macedonia to the deserts of Gedrosia, from the Nile's fertile banks to the jungles of the Indus, his empire stretched farther than any Greek had ever imagined. Yet for all his victories, all his cities, and all his conquests, a different kind of battle began within him, a battle that no spear, no phalanx, and no war elephant could ever fight. By 326 BCE, Alexander had returned to Babylon, the jewel of his empire and the city that would define the final years of his life. Here, surrounded by scholars, generals, and ambassadors from lands he had never dreamed of visiting, he ruled an empire of millions. But the whispers were growing louder. His generals, who had followed him through every impossible campaign, began to question his decisions. His soldiers, exhausted and homesick, looked at him with something close to fear. Alexander's ambition, once a unifying force, now cast a shadow over everything, even those closest to him. He dreamed bigger than anyone dared. He sought to merge Greeks and Persians, Macedonians and Indians, creating a single civilization under his vision. He married Roxana, a Persian princess, to seal alliances and set an example. He encouraged his generals to do the same, insisting on a cultural fusion that was radical for the age. He demanded not only obedience, but devotion, that his men not merely follow him, but believe in him as something greater than mortal. But even the greatest conquerors cannot escape human limits. Alexander began to drink heavily, often wandering the city at night, pondering maps and histories, speaking to himself of worlds beyond even his own reach. He held grand feasts, sometimes lasting days, inviting nobles and soldiers alike to wine, music, and stories. Yet those feasts often ended in rage or sudden illness. Friends vanished under mysterious circumstances, generals argued, and plots whispered behind closed doors. In 323 BCE, the unthinkable happened. Alexander fell ill. Some say fever, some say poisoning, though the truth may never be known. For days he struggled in his palace, the empire he had carved from continents hanging in fragile balance. As he lay dying, he spoke not of victory, nor of revenge, but of unfinished plans. "Who will guard my empire?" he asked. "Who will finish what I began?" He died at the age of 32, a man who had never stopped moving, never stopped conquering, and never stopped dreaming. His body, preserved for hours in awe and grief, seemed too small for the vastness of the empire he left behind. Alexander the Great, the boy from Macedonia who crossed rivers, mountains, and deserts, the king who defeated kings and humbled empires, was gone. But his death could not erase his impact. Cities he founded, like Alexandria, became centers of culture, trade, and knowledge, spreading Greek ideas across 3 continents.
His campaigns inspired generals and kings for centuries. His soldiers, scattered across the lands they had conquered, carried Hellenistic culture into the farthest corners of the known world. And in every corner of his empire, his legend grew, a myth woven with blood, fire, and ambition. Yet his empire fractured almost immediately. Without his unifying presence, generals fought over territory. The vast Macedonian army split into factions, each claiming lands that stretched from the Aegean to the Indus. Greece once again fractured into city-states and kingdoms. The dream of a single empire, united under Alexander's vision, became a lesson in the fragility of human ambition. Even today, historians and storytellers marvel at the speed, daring, and audacity of his conquests. Alexander was not just a warrior, he was a force of nature. He changed the course of history not simply by the lands he conquered, but by the ideas he spread. The fusion of East and West, the belief that ambition could surpass borders, the notion that one man could shape the world. And yet, for all his greatness, there was tragedy. He never saw the world he had conquered at peace. He never knew the descendants of his soldiers would rule the lands he had claimed. He never reached the oceans beyond India, never walked through the cities of the Far East, never lived to see the blending of cultures he had imagined. His life was a race against time, a sprint through continents, a fever that burned brighter than most lifetimes could endure. The shadow he cast, however, remains. Every conqueror who came after him, from Rome to Napoleon, from the kings of Europe to the generals of empires long forgotten, carried a piece of Alexander's vision, and a warning: greatness is as fragile as it is powerful. To hold the world, one must be more than mortal. To rule it, one must endure beyond limits. Alexander endured, and in doing so, became immortal.
The Hellenistic world, Alexander's legacy unfolds. When Alexander died in 323 BCE, the world did not pause, it fractured. His empire, stretched from the Aegean Sea to the banks of the Indus, lacked a clear heir. A boy named Alexander IV, barely born, was proclaimed king, but real power fell into the hands of generals, men known as the Diadochi, the successors. Each claimed a piece of the empire, each dreamed of more, and soon the blood of brothers, soldiers, and kings soaked the lands Alexander had conquered. The first to move was Ptolemy, who took Egypt. With shrewd planning, he secured the Nile, marrying Alexander's legacy to the fertile lands and trade routes that would make Egypt a powerhouse for centuries. Alexandria, the city Alexander had founded, became a jewel of Hellenistic culture, a crossroads of ideas where Greeks, Egyptians, Persians, Jews, and merchants mingled. Its library, filled with scrolls and knowledge from across the known world, would become the envy of every scholar and the symbol of Alexander's vision, a fusion of civilizations. In the east, Seleucus carved out an empire stretching from Babylon to India. The Seleucid kingdom faced constant challenges, revolts, rival generals, and distant territories that demanded endless campaigns to hold together. Yet it carried Greek influence deep into Asia, planting cities, spreading language, art, and governance. Greek culture, which had once been confined to city-states like Athens, now mingled with Persian palaces, Indian temples, and Babylonian ziggurats. The world was no longer divided, it was becoming Hellenistic, Greek in style, but universal in reach. Meanwhile, Antigonus and his descendants battled for control over Asia Minor and the Levant. Wars erupted like storms across the lands, brothers against brothers, generals against generals, cities against armies. The scale was enormous. Tens of thousands of soldiers marched across deserts, mountains, and rivers.
Siege engines tore through city walls, and diplomacy was often as deadly as swords. Each general sought not just territory, but legitimacy, the right to call themselves Alexander's heir in spirit, if not in blood. Amid the chaos, cities flourished. The Hellenistic rulers were not just conquerors, they were patrons of arts, science, and architecture. Pergamum, Antioch, and Alexandria became laboratories of culture, where scholars studied astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. Artists sculpted statues that combined Greek ideals of beauty with Eastern symbolism. Temples rose in hybrid styles, honoring gods both old and new. Even in a fractured empire, the seeds of unity through culture thrived. Trade, too, exploded. Greek ships sailed across the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, carrying pottery, wine, silver, and olive oil. From Egypt to India, caravans moved silk, spices, gems, and knowledge. Currency was standardized, markets flourished, and cities grew into cosmopolitan centers where Greek, Persian, Indian, and Egyptian ideas collided. Alexander's dream of a connected world, a world that spoke one language of culture, if not one tongue of speech, was slowly becoming reality. Yet the Hellenistic age was not without struggle. Local populations resisted Greek rule. Revolts flared, and old city-states like Athens and Sparta tried to reclaim their independence. Mercenaries fought wars for pay rather than loyalty. Assassinations became a common tool. Generals and kings vanished overnight, replaced by ambitious relatives or opportunistic soldiers. The ideal of Alexander's united empire had splintered, but the Hellenistic rulers were clever enough to turn division into governance, creating dynasties that endured for centuries. In culture, the Hellenistic world was vibrant and revolutionary. Philosophy evolved from Athens' debates to new schools of thought: Stoicism, emphasizing discipline and virtue; Epicureanism, seeking happiness through moderation; and skepticism, questioning even the foundations of knowledge. Libraries housed works from Greece, Persia, India, and Egypt. Scholars translated texts, recorded observations of stars and planets, and developed medicine that saved lives in ways Alexander himself might never have imagined. Art and literature no longer simply celebrated gods or kings. They explored humanity, ambition, love, and mortality. The cities themselves reflected Alexander's legacy. Alexandria in Egypt became the crown jewel, its streets buzzing with scholars, merchants, and travelers. Ships from Greece, India, and the Red Sea docked daily, carrying ideas as eagerly as goods. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, guided sailors, but also symbolized the light of knowledge in a sprawling, often chaotic empire. Even as kingdoms fought, culture and learning became the true glue that held Alexander's world together. And meanwhile, the Diadochi Wars continued to shape history. Ptolemies in Egypt, Seleucids in the east, Antigonids in Macedonia, all fought to expand, defend, and solidify power. Alliances were made and broken in the blink of an eye. Generals married into royal families to legitimize claims, or assassinated rivals to seize their lands. Cities were fortified, armies trained, and every ruler balanced on a knife edge between expansion and collapse. It was a world of brilliance and blood, where Alexander's legacy demanded both admiration and vigilance. By the end of the century, a pattern had emerged. Greek culture, language, and governance dominated urban centers. Local traditions survived, blending with Hellenistic influence. Across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East, coins bore Greek inscriptions. Temples featured Greek architecture with Eastern decorations. Philosophers debated in Alexandria, just as they once had in Athens. Alexander's vision, The unification of continents through culture, trade, and knowledge had survived, even if his empire in name had fractured. The Hellenistic world, born of conquest and ambition, was now a landscape of contrasts. Wealthy kings and poor farmers, Greek settlers and native peoples, scholars and soldiers all intertwined in a vast tapestry. Wars, diplomacy, trade, art, and philosophy created a rhythm that echoed Alexander's own relentless pace. His dream of a connected world where East met West persisted not through conquest, but through culture, education, and commerce. And in this world the echoes of one man's ambition continued to resonate. Alexander's shadow stretched far beyond his life. Cities named after him thrived for centuries. Knowledge preserved in Hellenistic libraries shaped science, mathematics, and medicine. Philosophers built upon ideas spread across continents. Even in political turmoil, the blending of cultures that Alexander initiated endured. Though his generals fought for power and empires rose and fell, the Hellenistic era carried the spark of possibility, a world where knowledge, art, and culture could travel farther than any army, where ideas outlived kings, and where the dream of Alexander, a single world connected by human ambition, lived on long after his body had returned to dust. Alexander had fallen, but his vision had become immortal.
Life in the Hellenistic cities, survival, science, and society. The world Alexander left behind was vast, dazzling, and chaotic. His cities stretched across continents, yet each shared a common heartbeat, the pulse of people trying to live, work, and survive under the shadow of an empire that had grown too fast and too large. From Alexandria in Egypt to Pergamon in Asia Minor, streets bustled with merchants, soldiers, scholars, and slaves, a mix of Greek settlers and local inhabitants, all bound together by circumstance, trade, and the remnants of conquest. For the average citizen, life was never easy. Houses were often small, cramped, and built from local stone or mud bricks. Wealthier citizens could afford columns, courtyards, and mosaics, but most lived in shared spaces with family and sometimes strangers. Water had to be drawn from public fountains or wells, food came from local markets, and sanitation was rudimentary. Streets were crowded with carts, animals, and people shouting over the chaos. Disease spread quickly, and medical knowledge, while improving in Hellenistic times, was still primitive for the common man. Yet amidst hardship, the cities thrived with intellectual life. Scholars worked tirelessly in Alexandria's great library, translating scrolls from Egypt, Persia, and India into Greek. Mathematics, astronomy, and medicine advanced in ways that would influence the world for centuries. Doctors experimented with surgical tools, studied anatomy, and documented treatments, though often at the expense of the patient's comfort. Observatories tracked stars and planets, developing models of the heavens that would challenge thinking for generations. Trade was the lifeblood of the Hellenistic world. Merchants carried goods from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and beyond, introducing spices, silks, and precious stones to the bustling markets. Ships and caravans linked distant cities, not only spreading wealth, but also ideas. Coins bore Greek inscriptions, promoting a shared culture even in far-flung territories. A trader in Antioch might discuss philosophy with a Greek scholar in the morning and barter Indian gems by afternoon, a world of connection unimaginable a century earlier. Education became a symbol of status and survival. Greek language and literature were taught alongside mathematics and science. Young men studied rhetoric, learning to speak persuasively in courts, councils, and assemblies. Philosophy schools like Stoicism and Epicureanism offered guidance on morality and personal happiness, instructing citizens on how to live wisely in a world still dominated by uncertainty. Women, though often excluded from formal schooling, could wield influence through households, patronage, and trade.
public entertainment was an essential outlet. Amphitheaters hosted plays that blended Greek myths with local stories. Festivals celebrated gods old and new, mixing rituals with music, dance, and feasting. Chariot races and athletic contests brought citizens together, offering brief moments of excitement and distraction from daily toil. Even slaves, soldiers, and laborers found temporary relief in festivals or public games, where the impossible energy of a city could overwhelm individual hardship. The economy, while dynamic, was harsh. Farmers labored under heavy taxes to feed the cities. Artisans produced luxury goods for the wealthy. Soldiers marched endlessly to enforce the rule of distant kings. Inflation, theft, and corruption were constant threats. Food shortages could spark riots, and mercenary armies sometimes exploited unrest. Life was precarious, but people adapted, creating vibrant urban cultures despite instability. Religion, too, adapted. Greek gods merged with local deities. Zeus mingled with Egyptian Amun, Athena with Indian goddesses. Temples became centers of worship, civic pride, and sometimes political power. Priests controlled knowledge and ritual, influencing both rulers and ordinary citizens. Festivals offered not only devotion, but also a chance to witness wealth and spectacle, a reminder of both divine favor and the inequality of human life. Architecture showcased ambition. Public buildings, bridges, and marketplaces reflected Greek ideals of symmetry and proportion, but local styles and materials gave each city its own character. The lighthouse of Alexandria guided sailors and symbolized human ingenuity. Theaters and gyms reflected a commitment to leisure and education, even in societies marked by inequality. Cities were laboratories of culture, where Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian traditions collided and created something entirely new. Military presence remained constant. Garrisons were stationed to protect trade routes, suppress revolts, and enforce royal decrees. Soldiers trained rigorously, their presence a reminder that life in these cities was both a privilege and a duty. Citizens could thrive, but they lived under the shadow of organized force, aware that rebellion or negligence could invite brutal punishment. In every corner of the Hellenistic world, Alexander's vision endured not in the form of a single empire, but as a network of interconnected cities, cultures, and knowledge. Citizens learned to navigate complexity, surviving wars, famine, and social upheaval, while participating in commerce, scholarship, and civic life. The ordinary man and woman might never march with Alexander, but they inherited a world shaped by his ambition. A world where survival demanded resilience, intellect, and adaptability. By blending Greek ideals with local traditions, Alexander's successors created urban centers that would influence civilization for centuries. Science, philosophy, art, architecture, and commerce thrived alongside human struggle, showing that culture and survival were intertwined. In these cities, the legacy of conquest became the foundation of enduring human achievement. Even as wars continued at the edges of the Hellenistic world, within the cities, life went on. Merchants sold spices, scholars debated philosophy, children played in the streets, and families shared meals. Every street, marketplace, and temple echoed the story of a world connected by ambition, intellect, and human resilience. Alexander may have crossed the world, but it was the people of his cities who carried his vision forward, in daily life, in knowledge, and in the blending of cultures that would shape the future of the Mediterranean and beyond. In the Hellenistic cities, survival was an art, culture was a weapon, and life itself became a testament to the enduring power of human ambition.
Wars of the successors, the Hellenistic kingdoms in conflict. Alexander was gone, but the world he left behind was anything but quiet. His empire, stretched across continents, lacked a single ruler. Instead, power fractured into the hands of his generals, the Diadochi,
who were determined to carve their own kingdoms, defend their territories, and outmaneuver one another. What followed was a century of intrigue, battles, alliances, and betrayals, shaping the Hellenistic world in ways that still resonate through history. The first conflicts erupted almost immediately after Alexander's death in 323 BCE. Ptolemy secured Egypt, Seleucus took Babylon and the eastern provinces, Antigonus controlled Asia Minor, and Lysimachus seized Thrace. Each general proclaimed legitimacy, claiming to protect Alexander's heirs while pursuing personal ambition. The fragile unity of the empire quickly disintegrated into war. Battles raged across the Mediterranean and Near East. Armies, some numbering tens of thousands, marched through deserts, mountains, and river valleys. Sieges destroyed cities. Mercenaries changed sides for pay. Every victory was hard-won, every defeat catastrophic. Cities often changed hands multiple times, leaving local populations to suffer famine, destruction, and uncertainty. Families lived in fear, farmers abandoned fields, and the constant movement of armies disrupted trade and daily life. The Battle of Ipsus in 301 BCE stands out as a turning point. Antigonus, seeking to reclaim lost territory, faced a coalition of his former allies. Elephants thundered across the battlefield, phalanxes clashed with relentless precision, and generals commanded from war wagons, issuing orders that could decide the fate of entire regions. Antigonus fell, and his empire shattered, demonstrating the relentless and unforgiving nature of these wars. Despite the chaos, cities continued to grow and thrive culturally. Alexandria remained a beacon of learning, with scholars documenting mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Pergamon became a center for philosophy and art. Even as armies fought over borders, trade flourished. Merchants carried goods from the Mediterranean to India, spreading not only wealth, but also ideas, languages, and religious practices. Coins bearing Greek inscriptions circulated widely, creating a shared economic and cultural framework across vast territories. Political marriages became tools of diplomacy. Generals married into royal families to legitimize claims, while assassinations and betrayals eliminated rivals. Intrigue became a constant feature of court life. The Hellenistic kingdoms were a world of paradoxes, immense wealth and poverty, education and superstition, art and war coexisting side by side. Ordinary citizens navigated this complexity, trying to survive while participating in a world shaped by ambition and conflict. The Hellenistic era also saw the blending of cultures on an unprecedented scale. Greek settlers lived alongside Egyptians, Persians, Jews, and Indians. Temples honored both Greek gods and local deities. Festivals, rituals, and art reflected a fusion of traditions. In architecture, Greek design combined with local materials and symbolism, creating cities that were both familiar and exotic. This cultural hybridization became one of Alexander's most enduring legacies, even as political borders shifted constantly. Education remained central to Hellenistic life. Schools taught rhetoric, philosophy, mathematics, and science. Stoicism and Epicureanism offered moral guidance amidst uncertainty. Libraries preserved knowledge from Greece, Egypt, Persia, and India. Scholars debated, experimented, and wrote extensively, creating a foundation for intellectual achievement that would influence civilizations for centuries. Trade networks adapted to the instability. Merchants learned to navigate changing borders, paying tribute to multiple rulers and using diplomatic connections to protect their caravans. Goods moved faster than armies could, connecting distant parts of the empire through commerce and communication. Markets thrived despite political instability, showing the resilience and ingenuity of the people. Military innovation continued during this period. Armies incorporated war elephants, siege engines, and advanced phalanx formations. Generals learned from each battle, adapting strategies to terrain and enemy tactics. Soldiers endured harsh conditions, long marches, and limited supplies, reflecting the harsh realities of life in a world defined by perpetual conflict. Even as the wars persisted, the Hellenistic kingdoms stabilized in the long term. Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucus Asia, and Antigonid Macedonia emerged as lasting dynasties. Each maintained armies, trade networks, and urban centers that promoted Greek culture alongside local traditions. This balance of power allowed cities to flourish culturally, even as political life remained tense and often violent. In the end, the wars of Alexander's successors reveal a world where ambition, strategy, and survival intertwined. The Diadochi shaped borders, built dynasties, and fought relentlessly for power, but they also maintained the cultural and economic networks Alexander had established. Ordinary people continued their daily struggles, but the cities they lived in became centers of knowledge, trade, and hybrid culture. Alexander may have been gone, but the ripples of his conquests defined the Hellenistic age. Every battle, every alliance, every betrayal was a testament to his vision, a connected world where Greek ideas met local traditions, where ambition and survival shaped history, and where culture endured even when empires fell.
The end of an era. Daily life, knowledge, and legacy in the Hellenistic world. By the time the Hellenistic kingdoms had stabilized, centuries of conquest, war, and ambition had transformed the Mediterranean and Near Eastern world. The vast territories once unified under Alexander were now divided among his successors, yet his influence persisted in every city, market, and school. This was a world shaped by both struggle and brilliance, a place where ordinary people endured hardship while simultaneously witnessing unprecedented cultural and intellectual achievements. Daily life for the average citizen remained challenging. Streets in cities like Alexandria, Pergamum, and Antioch were crowded with merchants, craftsmen, scholars, soldiers, and children, all navigating a landscape shaped by politics and trade. Houses varied. The wealthy could afford spacious homes with courtyards, columns, and mosaics. The middle class lived in modest dwellings, and the poor squeezed into tiny rooms with minimal amenities. Water and food required effort. Public fountains, wells, and markets were essential, and disease remained a constant threat. Yet life went on, and people adapted, developing routines, festivals, and social networks that allowed communities to survive and even thrive amidst uncertainty. Education and intellectual life flourished in ways unimaginable a century earlier. The great library of Alexandria preserved scrolls from across the known world, Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Indian texts. Scholars debated mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and medicine, documenting observations that would influence civilizations for centuries. Young citizens studied rhetoric, learning to speak persuasively in courts and assemblies. Schools of thought like Stoicism, Epicureanism, and skepticism provided guidance, teaching people how to navigate a world filled with unpredictability and opportunity alike. Science and medicine advanced rapidly. Physicians experimented with surgical techniques, wrote detailed treatises, and studied anatomy, while astronomers mapped the skies with unprecedented precision. Trade and cultural exchange allowed knowledge to flow freely. Greek mathematicians could access Indian astronomy. Egyptian medicine could be compared with Persian remedies, and ideas blended seamlessly across regions. Even ordinary citizens benefited indirectly. Improved irrigation, better shipbuilding, and new agricultural techniques enhanced survival, while festivals and public spaces brought moments of relief and entertainment. Trade was the lifeline of the Hellenistic world.
Merchants sailed across the Mediterranean, navigated the Red Sea, and sent caravans deep into Asia. Goods included spices, silks, wine, olive oil, and precious metals, connecting distant regions through commerce and culture. Currency was standardized across vast areas, fostering economic cohesion despite political instability. Markets thrived with goods from multiple continents, and cultural exchange followed trade routes just as closely as caravans. Greek inscriptions on coins, public buildings, and marketplaces ensured a shared cultural identity, bridging the gap between local populations and Greek settlers. Religion remained fluid and adaptive. Greek gods merged with local deities, Zeus with Egyptian Amun, Athena with Indian goddesses, creating hybrid religious traditions. Temples became not only centers of worship, but also hubs of civic activity, social networking, and even political influence. Festivals offered both devotion and entertainment, blending ritual with music, performance, and communal participation. For ordinary citizens, these religious spaces were vital anchors in a world of instability, providing meaning, structure, and shared identity. The Hellenistic cities also maintained a constant military presence. Garrisons patrolled streets, protected trade routes, and enforced royal decrees. Soldiers trained rigorously, facing harsh conditions, long campaigns, and limited supplies. Their discipline preserved order, but it also reminded citizens that life in these cities was never without risk. Survival required ingenuity, adaptability, and constant awareness of the world beyond one's doorstep. Art, architecture, and public spaces reflected a blend of Greek and local styles. Mosaics, statues, and frescoes captured both beauty and narrative, depicting gods, heroes, and ordinary life with remarkable realism. Theaters and gymnasiums fostered physical, intellectual, and social development, while bridges, aqueducts, and roads enabled commerce and connectivity. Even the poorest neighborhoods participated in the city's vibrancy, contributing labor, craftsmanship, and local culture to the larger Hellenistic tapestry. By this time, Alexander's vision of a connected world was fully realized in culture, if not in politics. Trade, art, philosophy, and science created a network that transcended borders, languages, and ethnicities. Ordinary people may not have marched with Alexander, but they lived in the cities and streets that bore the fruits of his ambition. They experienced the duality of hardship and opportunity, enduring disease, taxes, and labor, while participating in unprecedented cultural and intellectual growth. As the Hellenistic era matured, it became clear that its greatest legacy was not military conquest, but cultural fusion. Greek language, art, and philosophy blended seamlessly with Egyptian, Persian, and Indian influences. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy flourished. Knowledge was codified, debated, and preserved. Even in political fragmentation, these cities became engines of human progress, showing that civilization could survive and even thrive amidst instability and uncertainty. The ordinary citizen of the Hellenistic world was both witness and participant. They bought and sold goods, attended schools, celebrated festivals, and contributed labor to the city. They endured wars at the empire's edges and threats in daily life, yet they also experienced the transformative power of culture, knowledge, and commerce. Their world, shaped by Alexander's ambition, demonstrated that human resilience could turn conquest into civilization. In the final analysis, the Hellenistic era was a testament to the enduring influence of Alexander's vision. Conquests may have fractured, empires may have fallen, but the blending of cultures, the pursuit of knowledge, and the survival of cities endured.
The struggles of ordinary people and the brilliance of scholars, merchants, and rulers together created a world that was vibrant, connected, and enduring. So, as we leave the streets of Alexandria, Pergamum, and Antioch behind, we realize the true power of this world, not in armies or borders, but in the human capacity to endure, learn, and create. Ordinary people living under extraordinary circumstances transformed hardship into culture, survival into civilization, and a fractured empire into a legacy that would echo for millennia. Alexander may have left the world in pieces, but through the Hellenistic cities, knowledge, and culture, he left something far greater, a testament to human ambition, ingenuity, and resilience, a world where even the most ordinary citizen could participate in shaping history. The Hellenistic era ended, but its lessons endured. Cities thrived, knowledge spread, and cultures merged, a vivid reminder that survival, learning, and creativity are timeless, and that the spirit of a connected world, first imagined by Alexander, could live on in every market, classroom, and street of the ancient Mediterranean.